This week, there was what some have described as a milestone moment in the mainstreaming of psychedelic media coverage, and that was Michael Pollan being hosted by Oprah Winfrey. And yourself, as an executive who worked for many years producing mainstream media content, what does it mean for a figure like Oprah to extend her platform to covering psychedelics? And let's talk about the benefits and the potential drawbacks.
I think it's a bit, Albert Huxley had an incredible quote that said, "To fathom hell or feel angelic, take a pinch of psychedelic." I think the Oprah interview was a bit of both, right? There was this, hell, hold on a second. Oprah, who a couple years ago was like, MDMA is bad, it's going to burn your brain, it's horrible. And then you got Michael Pollan, who many might say he's done psychedelics 2 or 3 times, and now he's the psychedelic expert. What is it about? But at the same time, who was Oprah talking to? She wasn't talking to us. Like, we know what psychedelics are. We know what the potential is. We know how they're being used. Her audience is the normal, everyday soccer mom, that veteran's wife, that entrepreneur. That's who she was talking to. So in the sense, as someone who worked in media, where media is very quick for negative headlines, right? We all remember a year and a half ago, pilot takes shrooms, tries to down plane. That's the type of stuff that newsrooms salivate for. And that's why it's important when we see things like this, when we see this Oprah interview, that even though we might be reluctant to, like, really, hold on, we've been the stewards of this for years, and what about, listen to who they're talking to, right? We need more people to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, wait, hold on a second. Now I'm a little bit psychedelic curious. If Oprah's talking about this, maybe I should delve in a little bit more. So I think that, Dennis, it's important that we have these figures, right?
So speaking of coverage in the media or lack thereof, Alex, you were raised in a tiny town in the Austrian Alps. And we've discussed this before, that you never heard anything about psychedelics growing up. So I'm curious, how did that upbringing and the lack of psychedelic coverage shape your perspectives about psychedelics when you first started to encounter them in London?
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. I grew up like in this super tiny town in the Austrian Alps and also super protected. And how it was for me to have any access to media was I had to travel to the next city and buy a magazine there, right? So it's like a whole different world growing up like this. And then in London, I heard about psychedelics just from friends going out. And how I got interested in was then reading a few articles, Vice magazine it was, and starting to work at Dazed and Confused magazine after all. And I got exposed to this and was interested in it as a topic. But how I read about it was just on the surface level of, this is what people do, this is why it is dangerous, this is why I shouldn't be doing it. But I was always curious and I was thinking, hold on a minute, if that does that and that to the brain, is it not also able to be used for good?
You touched on some great key points, but I find it so interesting how over time, the media has framed psychedelics in wildly divergent contexts, whereas when the term psychedelic was coined in the latter half of the 1950s, around that era, it became, right, the whole Summer of Love by 1969. That whole run, psychedelics were this utopian ideal, and they were often associated with radical leftism, the anti-war hippies, peace and love. And now, you look to today and they're increasingly associated with the Make America Healthy Again movement, right?
I think at its core, psychedelics and the media, psychedelic media is about storytelling, right? We're trying to raise the vibration by telling these stories about how people's lives have changed, how their traumas have healed, and how they've come back home to themselves.
Back to that same thing where it's, when I started to work in television, you literally needed a studio, and you needed cameras, and you needed a director, and you needed someone to put it up to a satellite, and you needed to buy some time on airwave. Now it's all here. So we are the media, like we are the brand, right? In other words, what I did with my brand was, it was me, it was my story. It wasn't so much about the apparel. It was my story that resonates with people, right? It's when you do that, when you share your story of, look, this is helping me this way, or this is helping me that way. That's what resonates with people, and that's what changes, right? But not everyone has your story. So if we can use our stories, right, as the media to really honestly, openly, and objectively talk about psychedelics, we can really amplify this conversation.
How I learned about you, Dennis, was because I saw one of your videos about, I think it was about the conference in Malta, like all these years back, 2-3 years back, when you were like talking
100
about
years in DMT years.
I know. Like, I haven't met you at that stage. It was such a relief. And I was like, I thought I'm starting to find my tribe. And I really love how you, at least to me, where you built your brand about yourself and about the truth. And you're like, I'm just saying what I'm saying, and I'm just daring to say what others might not. And I'm commenting on things that others might not.
I have a background in media production. I have a degree in media, and I've been a psychonaut since 2006. I really drank the Kool-Aid, and I applied my insights from the mushroom experiences I had at a young age to my course of study. And so I had a sense of freedom and cognitive liberty in that I got to go to media and design school in San Francisco and learn from this kind of first wave of Western psychonauts. I was hanging out on Alan Watts's houseboat, and I made the connection between, for me, my mushroom experiences and early psychedelic experiences were informed by visionary exploration and by imagination. And then at some point, I found out there's a real hunger and a market for satire, especially in this space, because there's so many people who take themselves so seriously, right? These are supposed to be like ego-dissolving agents, and they amplify people's egos. And then what I wrote about with that clapback a little bit about the New York Times, or rather the Oprah and Michael Pollan piece, was this label of the expert, the overnight expert. And I can appreciate that if you're dropping in as a parachute journalist, which is something I want to talk about, that your objectives to cover psychedelics from the only way you know how, which is to cover it from the outside as an objective journalist. But it turns out that like gonzo journalism and satire, they work really well with psychedelics because it's that personalization factor that you can't really capture with standard journalistic practices from my perspective. And there's room for both of them. So thank you for that.
This medicine is about really shifting the world, changing the world, and healing. So we got to keep forging ahead. Yeah.
Speaking about changing the world, I often find, as I've commentated upon frequently, that the psychedelic conversation we're having right now is pretty localized to the global West oftentimes, right? Like these conferences, the conference circuit, it's like Denver, Austin, London, and you're from Colombia, right? Colombia has multiple millennia-old entheogenic traditions, but there's a real lack of coverage of bringing them into the global conversation. Let's talk a little bit about censorship and about this tension between new media and traditional media. And we see with a lot of legacy media, like you worked at with CNN, is it's quite a hierarchically controlled narrative usually. It's coming from a studio executive. It's usually molded or pitched or framed in a certain way with a certain agenda. And then you have content creators and new media, and it's a free-for-all. And you get a lot of charlatans, right? But obviously, there's great stories from both angles. But in particular, new media, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, etc., seems to be very beholden to censorship. And for example, with Alex, with Psychedelics Design, you make these beautiful, visually stunning graphics and posts, and they're educational, and then they get 2 likes because the algorithm says, oh, she used the psilocybin word and she didn't do the dumb shit where you put the weird lots over it or whatever. You know what I mean?
Bullshit.
So yeah, what is that as a emerging new media creator? How do you handle the fact that you're censored so often about what you're at South by Southwest for? The same thing.
People just you know better how hard it is when you grew your Instagram account, like you have followers and you're trying your best to grow a community, and then from one day to the next, you're just vanished and you're just gone, which pretty much sucks. How I deal with it, I don't. Because whatever I'm trying, like there is no guarantee for nothing. So I'm just trying to keep posting and engaging my audience. I'm mainly using Instagram and LinkedIn, which for me is also really interesting because when I post on LinkedIn, for example, and so much to that, I don't get many likes, but I get a lot more engagement. And that is also because people are interested in that, but don't necessarily want to be seen being interested in psychedelics.
I think a lot of the psychedelic conversation happens in those groups. And so we start to talk about psychedelics in the media as this like broad thing, huge podcasts, news articles, and coverage. But the media also bleeds into those small rooms, those small WhatsApp groups, the Signal ones that have the 24-hour expiration date.
It is so nice to see how the networks here in the US are so open and sharing. And it's not necessarily just like that in Austria, in Switzerland, in Germany, maybe a little bit more in the UK. And Dennis, you have quite a bit of experience in appearing in some magazines. I think you are doing like the full circle at all times. That's how it feels to me from the outside.
Oh, I love getting quoted in the press. Any press here? Hit me up after. Let's talk. But at the same time, you get to see how the sausage is made. And it's pretty wild to do an hour-long interview or answer 22 questions. And then they choose the shittiest, worst quote that you put. And they put it out there and they couch it in this way that is completely out of context. And I know many people have experienced that, including people in this room, where all of a sudden it's like, wait, that's not what I said. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. And because of that, a lot of people are afraid of the press. And that shouldn't be what we have. And that was a situation that's evolved over the last couple of years. I've even heard it referred to as McCarthyism, where like people will share with me about some of my stuff I make. They'll write me privately that they really agree or they like it or whatever, but they're afraid to comment on it publicly because of fear of public repercussion. So like, how can we create and foment a media that doesn't weaponize against people? Because ultimately it can be ideological warfare. One other thing I wanted to bring up is blind spots. Like the blind spots that I see right now, especially in the mainstream media, is so much of the coverage is heavily focused on this clinicalization and pharmaceuticalization and quote legitimizing. And that was the bone I had to pick with the Oprah Pollan interview. It's not that I don't appreciate that these major stars are lending their platforms to covering psychedelics. It's that they're omitting a huge amount of what I see has actually been happening. Like in 56 minutes on that podcast, they didn't once address indigenous use that goes back millennia, right? And we talk about how can we inform a more ethical, better mainstream? It's like maybe fucking invite the people who have been doing it for 4,000 years to the table instead of sidelining them, right? So that's one angle. And then a second angle there about that is like this overnight celebrity, which is what I talk about with parachute journalists, right?
I go back to the same thing and I'll harp it till the end. We are the media. Like we're the ones who inform people. We're the ones that need to educate people through our stories, through our experience, through the trials we're doing, through the media that we're doing. It's totally up to us.
What we're trying to do is spread how psychedelic medicine can change our lives, can raise consciousness. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of blind spots, especially in that interview, but it's us having conversations like this, talking about all parts of it, that's going to change the world.
And how do we inform ourselves? Like, what is the media that we consume? Is it like this one source or are these like these 30 sources? And also, how much do we ask Perplexity or other AI tools in giving us a summary of something?
The goal for me, at least, is to do that work and then hopefully leave my energy clear enough so whoever is lucky enough to get it on the other side, it gets it a little bit more clear and a little bit more light-filled.